Hello everybody, my name is Fariba and welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So today I would like to just talk about some of the books that I'm currently reading. So I'm currently reading Montaillou by Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie, which is a book about a village in southern France in the late 13th, early 14th century called Montaillou. It was a Cathari village. So the Cathari, or the Albigensians, were a dualistic heresy that existed in this time period and was then eventually snuffed out by an aggressive Inquisition/crusade. The information that we have in this book about peasant life comes from an Inquisition registry from Jacques Fournier, who was eventually made Pope Benedict XII. Pope Benedict XII was the Avignonese successor to John the 22nd. If you know anything about the history of the papacy, it was in Avignon, which is in southern France, for over 70 years, and Benedict XII was one of these popes. But before he was ordained bishop and then eventually became pope, he was an inquisitor. While he wasn't a Dominican himself, he was often working alongside the Dominican Inquisition to suppress heresy. So the information that we have about peasants comes from the interrogation of suspected heretics. Ultimately, 7 were sent to the stake. This is a really interesting book because it tells us a lot about the Dominican Inquisition, about the Albigensian heresy, but particularly about day-to-day life in an Occitan village. So I will be talking more about this book once I finish it. Hopefully I finish it next week, but this is a really fascinating / disturbing book about persecution of a little known religious sect. Then I'm also reading Gerbert, which, if you recall, I talked about in one of my older videos. So Gerbert is actually the sequel to Garin-le-Lorrain. But Gerbert is part of the Lorrain cycle. It's an epic story from the 13th century. It's part of the William of Orange cycle. And this is this extremely rare translated work into modern French by Bernard Guidot. Even though most people will never have heard of it or even have access to this book, I really do want to do a video about it because it's really, really interesting. It's actually quite exciting. And this might be due to the translator's skill than anything else, but it's about two families. Gerbert, who's part of the Lorrain family, is in battle with Froment, who's of the Bourguignon family. And Gerbert himself is a mercenary whose father was killed by Froment, and so he wants to avenge the death of his father. His cousin is actually the queen. She is married to Pepin, who's the Emperor of France. And Pepin is just a really weak, pathetic king. So it seems as if his knights are often the ones in control of the kingdom. They're able to get away with quite a lot. So when Gerbert is upset with the Emperor, he just goes somewhere else and works for another king. So that's really interesting. And also, the queen is extremely powerful in comparison to her husband. So when she is accused of being a whore, she punches her accusers in the face so that the blood is dripping down onto their beard. It's a pretty violent imagery here, but she is very powerful, and I was just so surprised to see that in a medieval text. I just love being surprised by what I find in medieval writings. So this is just a great story so far, and I'm interested in seeing what happens. So far, for whatever reason, thousands of knights will be killed by Gerbert, but for whatever reason, he can never kill Froment. Anyway, this is very interesting. And finally, I'm reading Origen's Contra Celsum, or Against Celsus. So Origen was a church father from the 3rd century who got into polemics with the writings, actually, of a Greek philosopher named Celsus. So Celsus had already died, but Celsus had been opposed to Christianity and wrote his criticisms in the form of a dialogue between a Jew and Jesus, where the Jew essentially represents Celsus and his views. Origen writes this massive response to Celsus, which is really interesting, I think, because it tells us so much about the beliefs of the time, of Origen's engagement with Greek philosophy, his particular approach to the scriptures, his particular perspective on Christ. Unfortunately, while Origen often is more readable than Augustine, he has a fairly negative reputation in the West since the 4th century, when Jerome condemned Origen. Some of his views were condemned by some ecumenical councils. And so while Eastern Christians are more accepting of Origen's views, the West has not been historically. I'm reading this because there's a Goodreads group that is dedicated to the Church Fathers and reading the Fathers, and I thought I would join in and continue to gain more knowledge about late antique Christianity. So that's what I'm also reading. I finished book 1 recently. I find it interesting that Origen is not launching ad hominems at Celsus. At least he's sparing in his ad hominems, which is very rare when it comes to theology. Theologians tend to be fairly nasty, which is unfortunate. But anyway, that's what I'm reading. I hope you guys have a good weekend, and I will come back to you next week with a recent reads video talking about all the books that I have finished in the last couple weeks. So, I will talk to you later. Bye now.